This is Duke University.
Thank you. Well, it's a great thing to be here, and it's finally here. The exhibition's here after dreaming of it for so long. It's here. And I would thank every single individual person who helped me make this come true, except, we'd be here all night because it's amazing. I mean, our main sponsor is Bank of America and Mary Duke Biddle Foundation and the Keenan Foundation, and many individuals just have been so generous with this project that it's just awesome. So thank you, everyone. President Broadhead's right. A curator gets to do a show like this once in a lifetime because it's extremely rare to be able to land these kinds of loans, these old masters borrowed from top museums in Europe and the US. And it is extremely rare for a university art museum, as President Broadhead pointed out, to partner with the second biggest museum in the United States, the MFA Boston. And it's very rare for a curator to be able to formulate a show out of her ongoing research, which began for me 20 years ago, and then to work for an institution, Duke University, which has allowed me to gestate, to evolve this research and think about it for these years, and to be able to be sent to Spain once a year to do research, and then, that's how it's all come about. But it's even rarer for a curator to be able to create an exhibition that does contribute to the art historical discourse, and rarer still to be able to change that discourse by new discoveries and new research. It's putting together an exhibition. The exhibition itself is, in itself, a piece of research, because we learn all kinds of things when we get these things together. And there have been some very interesting insights that have come from very important scholars already from when it was in Boston, and here too. So it is a great privilege and really once in a lifetime opportunity. Okay, now let's see. Okay, let's start out with the Three Phillips. Okay, on your left, this is Philip II, Philip III, and Philip IV, so we just don't get them mixed up. Okay, Philip II is pictured here in his battle armor that he wore in the Battle of San Quentin, where he quelched the heretics, which was one of his main missions in life, to defend the one true Catholic faith. And he reigned for a long time, for 40 years, from 1555 to his death in 1598. And then comes along our Philip III here. Philip reigned from 1598 to 1621, and that's the period that this show is about. And then his son, Philip IV, reigned from 1621 to his death in 1660. So I think even looking at these three portraits by the official royal portraitists, we can already get a little bit of a picture about what's going on. Philip III, was a teenager when he came to the throne. And he acted like a teenager when he came to the throne. He wanted to hunt and he wanted to fight in battles. He's being shown right there at the siege of Ostend, and that was at first. But then he began to develop this policy of peace. but in the beginning, he just wanted to do everything. And he was very, very interested in what the court chroniclers would call a new style of grandeur. And you can just see it in that armor that Pantoja de la Cruz painted. That's the picture that's in the exhibition. And you'll see it if you haven't already seen it. It's an amazing thing. Well, the first thing that, Philip III was sort of the Philip in between. He was really in the shadow of his father and of his son. His father built the Royal Collection, which really is the Prado today, and built the Escorial, which he left behind, that marvelous, marvelous complex of buildings, royal palace and library, monastery, etc., outside Madrid. And the son, of course, was the enlightened connoisseur that supported Velasquez and Rubens. And so history's been saying that Philip III was insignificant. He was weak, he was lazy. He appointed this man, our man here, the Duke of Lerma, as his favorite. And that was very, at the time, it was not thought to be a bad thing for this young king to have an older friend, as the literature put it, a good friend who would help him govern. Philip obviously loved the Duke of Lerma. Here we see him being portrayed by Peter Paul Rubens when Rubens visited the court in 1603. Well, the king really did love the Duke of Lerma. As soon as he came to the throne, he appointed him the first Duke of Lerma, and he gave him 2 court posts. The groom of the stole, which meant that he had control of all the palace, and the groom of the stole, like he got up and helped the king get dressed in the morning and at night, and then master of the horse. So when he was outside the palace, as master of the horse, he would also always be by the king's side. So he had total access to the king, and in that strict Habsburg court, that meant everything. That was the most powerful position that you could have, is total access to the king. Okay. Just see here where I am. Now, I thought, it might be fun to listen to this. I love this. I love to read this in front of this picture. This was written by Sir John Eliot in a book that he did with Jonathan Brown called A Palace for a King. And it was published in 1980. So he describes the favorite, the royal favorite. In the opening decades of the 17th century, when a Europe exhausted by the long wars of the later 16th century had lapsed into precarious peace, the dazzling figure of the favorite seemed an appropriate symbol of the new and more relaxed times. Part minister, part courtier, part royal confidant, he made the most, like a brilliant butterfly, of the transient days of sunshine before the return of winter. Throughout Western Europe, these early years of the 17th century were years of lavish spending on buildings and court spectacles, on jewels and rich clothing, on pomp and pageantry, and the favorite, digging deep into the royal coffers, could easily outdistance his rivals in this competition. So that's a really wonderful description of ooh, what's that? Was that up the whole time? Let's see, okay, all right. Okay, that's better, okay. Okay, so, Lerma becomes the royal favorite. He is by the king at all times, and this was controversial because in some ways some people thought that would threaten the Spanish monarchy because Philip II had control of everything, and he was a paperholic, and he would never let a favorite help him govern. He did let favorites help him govern, but they were secretaries and university people and clerics. They weren't high noblemen like this man, Francisco Gómez de Sandoval y Rojas is his name. This position that he had really sort of ruined his reputation and the king's reputation in many ways. But now the new revisionist view of it by historians is that it was a bold political move. It was a novel political move because he was really appointing. Philip was the first king, the first monarch in Europe to appoint a prime minister. And so, because the Spanish monarchy was huge and the bureaucracy was huge. And so, anyway, so he's also, sort of said to have been corrupt and vain and decadent and abusing the power that the king gave him. But there is another side that this exhibition brings out, and that is his life as an art patron. And this idea of Lerma as being abusing the power of the king, if you look at this picture, and he was vain and corrupt and unsophisticated culturally. That's what the history books have been telling us for centuries. But if you look at this picture and just imagine for a minute Peter Paul Rubens, the 26-year-old Fleming who painted it, and we look at how he painted and what he painted, and we have to see that Rubens, who was very astute, he's 26 now. He comes from Italy. He was an envoy, the Duke of Mantua, bringing pictures to Lerma, horses to the king as a political gift. He was sort of like the courier of the day. And he was really very miffed that he was not able to paint something of his own for the Duke of Lerma, and he writes about it in his letters. And he finally maneuvers the situation so that he gets this commission, and he works really, really hard on this commission, right? But look, and he's really trying hard. Rubens is really trying hard here. He's really trying to impress the Duke of Lerma, obviously, right? He's showing him as a Roman emperor on horseback. I mean, he didn't paint the king. He painted Lerma. And it's been a little bit of a puzzle to Rubens scholars why Rubens tried so hard to impress this man. But now we know why. We know why because of the Lerma inventories. These I discovered in this Hospital Tavera outside the walls of Toledo for my doctoral dissertation in 1987. And I was lucky enough to go through these private archives and find not one, not two, not three, but 13 inventories of the Duke of Lerma's collection. It was a huge find, really amazing. And it was amazing because once I analyzed it and collated it, I realized that really he was the first mega collector in all of Europe. He had 2,000 paintings. King Philip II only had 1,500. This comparison has been used by one of the authors in the catalog, Antonio Ferros, who's coming to speak here actually September 25th. This is a picture that, well, actually both pictures Rubens would have known. And So if we think about Rubens, we stay in the mindset of Rubens, he would have been a first-hand witness to the fact that people were beginning to say that the Duke of Lerma was the king. And you can see, you can see in this, in the comparison of the two portraits, both by Pantoja de la Cruz, neither one is in the exhibition, but I'm showing them here to make the point that Lerma is depicted with all the symbols of kingship. The armor, the general's baton, the table of justice, etc. And the only thing different is the head. I mean, you just switch the heads and it's almost the same person. So Rubens knew he was powerful. Rubens knew the extent of the Spanish Empire, which we often forget that in this period, the holdings of Spain were greater than those of the Roman Empire. And Rubens himself was a subject of the Spanish crown. He was from Flanders. Now, the inventories reveal a picture of Lerma as not only a great collector, but also as the major force in the art world of the time. These are two pictures that were in his collection. He had this Titian, a head of Salome, which is now in the Prado, and he had the Jacopo Bassano Nativity, also now in the Prado. A lot of Lerma's works ended up in the Prado because he sold one of his 5 palaces to the king, and he sold it with all the contents in it. And these two pictures were there. And he, he also had this wonderful Veronese, and that's now in the National Gallery of Scotland, and the Giovanni Bologna statue of Samson and the Philistine now in the V&A in London. And this was used for a fountain, and it was a gift from the Grand Duke of Tuscany, the Medicis. Now, in those ways, in the ways I just showed you, those 4 images, Lerma was emulating, on the one hand, he was emulating the taste of Philip II. Here's Philip II's Escorial and the main altar of the Escorial in the Basilica of the Escorial. And the Escorial, even in its own day, was called the 8th wonder of the world. Philip III, I believe, felt that he didn't have to go on building campaigns like this. His father had done it, and there were great palaces everywhere, all over, including this fabulous thing. And so, why spend the money on that? And he also didn't collect like his father. And it turns out that Lerma was the one. Lerma was the one who did the building campaigns, and Lerma was the one that carried forward this Habsburg tradition of art collecting. Now, I just wanted, while we've got this up on the screen, I just want to point out, this is the huge main altar in the Escorial. And it's, what I want to point out is that many of the altarpieces in the exhibition, many of the very, very large, tall religious pictures that you're seeing, they were once panels like this in an altarpiece. And that helped me think about the color of the wall because that's gold. And because the pictures themselves would have been seen surrounded by gold like this. Now, the other thing I want to show you is right in these little niches here were kneeling figures, kneeling figures of Charles V and his wife and Philip II and his wives. And they're adoring the host. And they were done by Pompeo Leone, who also did the bronze figures on the main altar. And here's the Duke of Lerma. He does his own cenotaph. He's building actually his own mini Escorial in the town of Valladolid in the Church of San Pablo. And he uses the same artist. And so he's imitating. He also builds. He builds a lot. He did have these 5 palaces, and the urban complex in the village of Lerma, which is still there, and this is a picture of it as it exists today, a little bit restored. It was amazing because it had this great palace, and it had this collegiata church, which is just almost it's one rung under a cathedral, and also 7 monasteries and convents, and they're all still there. These are pictures I took during my dissertation work before the palace was restored. Now it's turned into a Parador, and you can stay there. Ronnie Bear and I, the co-curator from Boston, who's an old friend, an old study buddy from the Institute of Fine Arts, where we both went to graduate school. Ronnie and I were very excited when we got a room in the Parador and stayed in Lerma. And because, it was like you looked out the window and you knew, that's what Lerma looked at. That's what the king looked at it. What's really interesting also about this reign is that the king often stayed for months at a time at Lerma's residencies, and that was unprecedented. Now, there is a way that Lerma departed from Philip II's taste, and that was in his love of Florentine art. This is the Frangelico Annunciation from around 1426 that is in the Prado Museum. It's the only Frangelico in the Prado Museum, and it belonged to the Duke of Lerma, we now know from the inventories. And it's the opposite of those Venetian high Renaissance artists, Titian and Veronese, with their painterly, manner. This is more fine, delicate lines and areas of saturated color. And he also patronized the contemporary Florentines who were at court. This is the work in the exhibition by Vicente Carducci. It's Christ contemplating his own crucifixion. Very moving work. It was in a private collection. We borrowed it from a private collector. It only turned up in the marketplace it would have been in the 80s, in the early 80s, and was immediately snatched up by this private collector, and it's been in the Hinojosa collection ever since. And this is the first time it's been seen anywhere, including Spain. And I'm comparing it to this bad photograph of Bartolome Carducci, his older brother. Bartolome came with the other Italian artists. There was a wave of them that came in 1585 to decorate the Escorial, to decorate that main altar. And but Philip II wasn't really keen on Bartolome. Philip II did not like Florentine art. He didn't like this linear style. So poor Bartolome, he just had to do, like touch-up work of the frescoes and things like that. But then, as soon as Lerma comes to power, Bartolome begins to get some very important commissions, like this one, which he did for the Royal Church of San Felipe el Real in Madrid. And now it's in the Prado. And Vicente was 8 years old when he came to Spain, and he was trained by his brother, and the brother stayed on in Spain, never went back to Florence. But, Vicente always was very proud of the fact that he was Florentine. And he was a very learned man. He owned over 300 books, all of which were well thumbed. He really read them. He wrote the most important art treatise in Spain in the 17th century, Diálogos de la Pintura, really important. And he was a great fighter for the rights of the artist in Spain. Here you see Vicente's, over here you see Vicente's reliquary altar that Duke of Lerma commissioned from him in 1606. Well, it was finished in 1606, probably commissioned right around the time Rubens was there in 1603. And it was done for a Reformed church that Lerma was building, a Reformed Franciscan church next to the Royal Palace in Valladolid. And this is the work in the exhibition, which I'm comparing to it. This work comes from a hospital in Madrid, a functioning hospital run by the Third Order Regular, the layman Franciscans. And Vicente himself was a lay Franciscan, belonged to this TOR order, and was buried in the robes of a Franciscan, as was King Philip III, actually. And this was a fun discovery for me because remember when we looked at that horrible black and white, this black and white. I mean, how can you tell if that's a good artist or not? Well, you can't, right? And that's all we had of paintings. All we had of reproductions of paintings of the reign of Philip III. That's what we had. That's why everybody thought the artists were not interesting. But then when you see the original like this, and I came upon it in the hospital. It was in a cloister right next to, the patients' rooms, but it was exposed to the sun and rain and air. So it's it's been damaged, but even damaged, you can see this amazing, it was an iconographical invention, really. The stigmatization of St. Francis has never been shown this way. Usually it's more like this when he's down on the ground, although he's levitating here, but down the ground, and then the seraphim's this little tiny thing way up there. That's the traditional way to represent the stigmatization. And this is just an amazing, intimate, really rapturous view of this wonder when Francis receives the wounds of Christ. And this religious spirit that you see throughout the exhibition, we see two things. We really see an amazing treatment of light, an arresting treatment of light and shadow. And then we see this pathos, or this rapture. And it was really reflecting something that was going on in the practice of Catholicism in this time. The Counter-Reformation was over. They won. Europe didn't turn Protestant. And so now was the time of the Catholic Reformation. And so part of the Catholic Reformation was that they would really begin to pray and meditate on their own. A layman would pray and meditate on his own. He didn't have to go to Mass and a priest and take a sacrament to be close to God, to talk to God. He now could have these intimate, mental prayers. And it was really Santa Teresa de Jesus, or we call her, Saint Teresa of Avila, and St. Ignatius of Loyola, those two great mystics who are influencing the practice in this day. In fact, and they were, I'll talk about them in a minute, but this is, the levitation idea really comes from St. Teresa, I'm sure, because she talks about, in her writing, she talks about when she has a vision, she feels like she's levitating, that she's on the wings of an eagle. And I think that's represented well by Vicente Carducci. Another thing that's running through the exhibition is this interest in naturalism. Not realism exactly, but naturalism. This work was commissioned by Lerma for his mini Escorial of San Pablo, and it's still there. This is one of the fish that got away from me. This is one of the only things that I really, really wanted to borrow. and went back 4 times to get. And the Dominican he wouldn't budge. He just would not budge, because it's really, it's carried during Holy Week. This has a little, if you can see it, there's a little door trap, and that is where the host is kept. So it's like a tabernacle, and he just didn't think it was right that it would go across the ocean, and he didn't think it was right that it would be in a museum. It's a cult object. It's a devotional object. And in fact, it was my first introduction to Spanish piety was through this work. People are laughing. Well, I mean, I had an appointment with a duchess to go see her still life painting this is way back, my first trip to Spain in 1978, and because I was working on Sanchez Cotán, I was working on still life, and so I had an appointment to go see her, and her niece worked at the Prado, and I met her in the library, and she said, "Well, I'll take you to my aunt's palace, and we'll drive in my car." And she stopped on the way to at the Pardo Palace, which has a version of this same Cristo Yacente by Gregorio Fernandez, and it's the one that the king actually commissioned. This was commissioned by Lerma, and then the king commissioned a duplicate. And once the king did it and Lerma did it, everybody did. I mean, there were like 12 versions of these. And then the workshop did more and more versions. I mean, these are all over, and they get bloodier and bloodier and worse. But this one is actually very, very strong and very realistic. The hands and the feet are turning, gray. And there are glass eyes and ivory teeth. And if you take a flashlight, you can look inside his mouth, and there's a tongue. This is what you do when you look at Spanish sculpture. You always do that because it could speak any minute, It's true. That's why they did it. But anyway, my introduction to piety was that this young girl, the niece, stopped. And I didn't know what she was doing. And she stopped, and she went into this, Capuchin monastery and went up to this object and kissed its feet, And I was like, whoa, 1978, whoa. I couldn't believe it. But anyway, I've grown to really love Gregorio Fernandez. And we have 2 of his works in the exhibition, including this one of St. Ignatius of Loyola. I really thought it was important to get polychrome sculpture for this exhibition, because it again is just a barometer of the interest in realism, naturalism, and the genius of this artist. I mean, this is a single tree trunk. This comes off, and that comes off, and the hand comes off, but all the rest of it is one tree trunk carved from a tree. And he was called the Michelangelo. He is called the Michelangelo of Spanish sculpture. Once he carved it, he would then give it to a painter, and the painter would do the face, and that's why the skin tones are so good. And it's been repainted. I mean, that's what the Spaniards do. Once the paint starts flaking off, they just get somebody to repaint it. And because this too was in a church, this too has never left the church. This too has never been in an art exhibition. It's just a very, very important object, and really it tells about the religiosity, speaks to the religiosity of the period. Now, another inventory from 1605 described the Duke of Lerma's camarine, which is a little room, it had 847 objects of ceramics and glass in a small room. It must have been very dazzling. It was obviously made to impress the visitor, right? And it was one little way of talking about or thinking about this new style of grandeur that Lerma was bringing to the court. And so for the exhibition, we have an evocative recreation of the Duke of Lerma's Camarine. And we borrowed pieces that were, the inventory is not detailed enough to know to borrow this specific piece, but it's detailed enough to know that he had, X number of Chinese export ware, and he would show it with red ware from the New World or Portugal, and he would show it with Venetian glass, which was always juxtaposed to glass from Barcelona. And in the design of the Camarine in there, when you see it, it's this step ledge composition, and that comes directly from the inventory that said that they were arranged on grados, which are or gradas, which are stepped shelves. And so when we designed this, I wanted stepped shelves, and I was thinking about this work, and we borrowed this work specifically from the National Gallery in Washington. It's a still life by Juan van der Hammen to show these this composition of stepped ledges. Now, the literature, my great friend Bill Jordan, who's the van der Hammen specialist, he always says, well, van der Hammen just completely invented this brand new way of doing still lifes. Well, I think it comes from the Camarine. So that's my point. Still lives. The Duke of Lerma also collected still lifes, and still lifes in this period was a very avant-garde genre. It was very new, it was brand new. Still lifes, they were a new, novel thing because although artists had painted fruits and vegetables in religious pictures or in mythological pictures, they had not until this moment in history, well, they did in the ancient times, but besides the Greek times, all the period from ancient Greece until now, until the early 17th century, there had not been pictures where there was actually no narrative. There was just, the idea was to create an illusion of reality. Now, this Sanchez Cotan, these are both by Sanchez Cotan, Juan Sanchez Cotan, who becomes a Carmelite monk, and this one was owned by Philip III's tutor, who was once the Archbishop of Toledo, Garcia Loaiza, and then this one was owned by the Duke of Lerma's uncle, who was the current Archbishop of Toledo, Bernardo Sandoval y Rojas. So the elites were collecting these things because they really weren't, they were so novel and avant-garde, it was a radical thing, and so the elites were interested in having them in their collection, and it meant that you were a very progressive collector if you did have them. Okay, and now another way that Lerma departs from Philip III's taste is that he had an El Greco in his collection. He had, in fact, I think he had this particular El Greco, St. Francis, from the San Francisco Museums of Fine Art, and it's the first picture in the exhibition, and that's not an accident, because it was very important for El Greco's late career that the Duke of Lerma, the major art patron, collected a work of his. Philip II had hated El Greco. El Greco tried, he came with the other artists to try and decorate the Escorial, and he painted one piece and then another piece, and Philip kept rejecting them. So he went to Toledo and spent the rest of his time being a successful artist and, of course, a very fabulous artist in Toledo. But this is the first time that that El Greco is producing these single saint pictures for private collectors. The Duke of Lerma must have started it. He had this as early as 1606. And after he had one, everybody wanted one. And we do think of El Greco as the isolated genius, isolated in his adapted city of Toledo, cut off from the mainstream. And one of the aims of the exhibition is to refute that view, because he did have influence on his contemporaries, and he was collected by the two major art patrons. The Archbishop of Toledo from 1600 to 1618 was Lerma's uncle. This wonderful work in the exhibition represents a commission that the Archbishop of Toledo, Bernardo Sandoval, a commission that he asked El Greco to do. It was a series of the 12 apostles and Christ, a series of 13 pictures, and we call them the Apostolato. And it's, until I started looking into this, I had no idea that it was El Greco who introduces this idea of the Apostolato to Spanish art. It then gets picked up, and we have another example in the exhibition, this superb piece by Giuseppe de Ribera. But just to go back, it was such a successful thing, this Apostolato, that El Greco was asked to do it 5 more times. And this piece in the exhibition, this piece comes from the last that he did, because it's unfinished, and it's a wonderful, wonderful chance to see El Greco's technique. Here you have the red ground, there's a black line here forming that sleeve, and he hasn't yet filled in what will become, he hadn't put the glazes in and the rest of the colors, and it will become a piece of drapery like this, but it's not yet there. The hand is unfinished, but the face is beautiful and completely finished, and it has that great El Greco emerald green that he's so famous for that nobody else can paint. And the sort of the iconographical invention of this was that he showed the apostles as portraits. He portraitized these saints. And then El Greco got a commission in Madrid during this time. He really came close, the closest in his life, to having the status of a court artist. This picture is the Annunciation that El Greco was commissioned to paint for the Colegio de Doña María de Aragon, which was an Augustinian seminary in Madrid. And this was in Boston. This was one of the pictures. We got almost everything, but a couple things we didn't get. And this grand picture, very, very important picture by El Greco, didn't come to us. But I'm showing it because it's really key to understanding El Greco's late career. Because, well, it's a very mystical picture. It's really based on the writings of a mystic, a monk who lived there. And he would have visions of the Annunciation. He had the burning bush in his vision, so it's all related to that. But even more important for us is that this picture and the rest, it was a huge altarpiece. This is just one panel. They were appraised by Bartolome Carducci, Vicente Carducci, and Pantoja de la Cruz, the royal portraitists, all Philip III artists, and they gave him the highest appraisal he'd ever received. And this is really significant because the Toledan elite really liked El Greco, but the artists, he wasn't really, he wasn't in the mainstream, and now he's really super respected by the court artists and by the collectors. And I just wanted to see, so this is Lerma's, right? And another way that El Greco influences his contemporaries is, this is another iconographical invention. St. Francis had never been shown this way. He's meditating. He's not getting the stigmata. He's not talking to the birds. He's actually meditating in his cave. And this is a sort of, it looks very common. It's a very common Baroque subject, but El Greco was the first one to do it, which is amazing. And then that kind of freedom to invent and think of painting the visions of St. Francis carries on through the reign, and we have in the exhibition this wonderful picture by Ribalta that shows that same sort of passion. And this is the picture, of course, that you see when you first come in the exhibition. It's the great example of the extraordinary height of creativity that El Greco was able to reach in his late career. And the thesis I have is that because El Greco was being collected by Lerma and all of Lerma's creatures at court, and the Archbishop of Toledo, who was second only to the Pope, by the way, in wealth, that this freed up El Greco to do what he wanted to do. He had a huge workshop. He no longer was dependent upon portraits or church commissions. He could invent. This was done for a church, but it was unfinished and left in his studio, the Vision of St. John. And it was the picture that Picasso saw in Zuloaga's studio. And I think you see, I'm not the first one to make this comparison. You see the relationship. El Greco really went out of favor almost as soon as he died, all the way until the 19th century, late 19th century, when Cézanne and others discovered him. This is El Greco's pupil, Luis Tristan. Luis Tristan carried El Greco's manner into the reign of Philip III after El Greco's death in 1614. This is doesn't photograph well. It's a really, when you see it in the exhibition, it's a beautiful picture, really, from the Fitzwilliam in Cambridge, and they cleaned it especially for the exhibition. And you see this kind of, El Greco figure right here. He's attempting to do that emerald green. He never quite gets it. And I compare it to a Bassano to make the point that, yes, he's carrying El Greco forward, but he's also looking at the Italians. In fact, he went to Italy and came back, and this was painted afterwards. And this figure, for example, is close to a Bassano type figure. And of course, it's also close to Caravaggio. He saw Caravaggio. He was in Rome in 1610, 1611. And you see the quote here, the dirty feet. When I'm going to switch gears and go to portraiture now, and Philip III here. This is his earliest official picture, the image of himself, and if you look closely at it, it does look. I have to admit, everybody admits. It looks archaic. It looks like it doesn't belong in this period, right? But if you look carefully, you can see that even though this is very static, and the face is treated like a mask. There is naturalistic light effects going on. See the chaos shadow there, and that's what Pantoja is bringing to this tradition of royal portraiture. He's following it closely, but he's bringing something new. And he's bringing not only the light effects, but he's bringing this idea of the cutout silhouette and the face that's lit from the front. I mean, this is natural light coming from the upper left and making this cast shadow, but the face itself is lit straight from the front, a whole different lighting system. And there was a reason for this. This is the Queen that we have in the exhibition, also from the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna. And I'm comparing Pantoja's Queen to his teacher's picture that's in the Prado. This is Alonso Sanchez Coello's picture of the Infanta Clara Eugenia, I think, with her hand on a dwarf, and that's what's going on here. But Pantoja puts her almost in a stage or in a black background, and very, very shallow space she's standing on, and the dress is cut out. The ruff is unbelievable. She actually, I mean, I can't believe she had to have a silver plate here to hold up that ruff. I mean, talk about new style grandeur. And her face too is lit from the front, And this is a system, this is a pictorial language that Pantoja developed in order to, and I'm comparing it to an Elizabethan portrait because it was the same aim. He needed to paint the monarchs as iconic figures, as almost semi-divine, as inaccessible, like Elizabeth had herself painted some, 20, 30 years before, because of the two bases of power, because of the monarchs and because of Lerma. So he was differentiating the monarchs in this manner. Elizabethan sort of fancy dress, and then that mask, the ever young monarchs. But Pantoja has another side to him, and this I discovered this accidentally when I was in Valladolid doing something totally different. Up on a stairwell, I saw this thing, and I just knew it was a Philip III picture. I didn't know who it was by, but I knew it belonged to, to this period. And sure enough, when I went close enough, I could see the signature. This is in the exhibition, of course, and I could see the signature, and it said Pantoja de la Cruz, and I was like, oh my God, the same guy that did those portraits did this religious picture. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Very Florentine. This is a very Florentine-looking Christ, kind of old-fashioned, but then the light effects and the position of the guards is what he's after. And this, more research showed that this was commissioned by the Duke of Lerma. It was hung in the hospital, the Hospital General, that Lerma was the patron of in Valladolid. So now we're back with Rubens' picture. And I wanted to read something that Rubens wrote, which is pertinent, I think. It's in a letter to his friend at the French court, and it's dated 1626. And he says, I thank you for the minute details which you give me on the news of the court, and that's the French court. Noteworthy news, especially with regard to the grandeur of the cardinal, and here he's referring to Cardinal Richelieu. One could rightly tell of him the same thing as that which happened to King Philip III during my time in Spain. The king, in granting audience to an Italian gentleman, referred him to the Duke of Lerma, with whom an audience was extremely difficult. But if I had been able to have an audience with the Duke, replied the gentleman, I should not have come to your majesty. All this confirms my belief that it is difficult to conduct affairs in a country where a single man has the power and where the king is only a figurehead. And when Rubens was there at court, he really did not have a high opinion of the Spanish painters, or Philip III painters. At least we're not really sure who he's referring to in his letters. He calls them the painters here, and sometimes he calls them assistants. So I'm not sure who he's really referring to, but he says, that they were incredibly incompetent, they were careless. God keep me from resembling them in any way, he says. They're going to claim the work. But what had happened was Rubens had been the courier for these 21 pictures that were present for Lerma's collection, and he presented them to Lerma. But they had been damaged en route from where he had landed in Alicante up to the court. And they had been damaged. It had rained heavily, and so he had to restore them. And Rubens is complaining in his letter back to Mantua about restoring them and about the suggestion that the ambassador made that the Spaniards help him do this. And he said, they'll either scorn my additions and retouches, or else they'll take over the work and claim it all as their own, especially if they know it is in the service of the Duke of Lerma, which may easily mean that the paintings are destined for a public gallery. So he's talking about the gallery that Lerma had in the ducal quarters of the royal palace in Valladolid when the court was in Valladolid. And the inventories tell us that he had 14 rooms and he had 1,000 pictures crammed into these 14 rooms. But he says, he says that he doesn't want to, he has to guard against being confused with anyone, however great a man. So he's really down on the art. So imagine his chagrin when in his commission, he never gets a sitting with the Duke of Lerma, just as he's saying in his letter. He never gets a sitting. He tries many, many times, and finally, he's been there a year now, and he really needs to go on. He's painted all the rest of the picture. He's painted, the horse, the armor, he's painted the date, he painted everything. And the head was what was missing. And we have a drawing, in fact, in Paris with all these elements, and the head has been cut out. And so imagine when he was told to go to the hunting lodge in Ventosilla to get a picture, to get a sitting with Lerma, but the court itinerary tells us that the day that Rubens arrived, the day before, the king and Lerma had left. So what they was sending him to see was Pantoja's official portrait of the Duke of Lerma. Another nice discovery of this exhibition is the work of Bartolome Gonzalez. He was the follower, the successor to Pantoja at court. So we see Pantoja's infantas here, and then infantes here, and then we see Bartolome Gonzalez painting the last two children of the king and queen. He's both more abstract, if you look very carefully when you compare these, when you see them in the exhibition. Pantoja was a very patient man, and he did, every tiny little, piece of thread. I mean, he renders it very like a Flemish artist almost, earlier Flemish artist. But then when Gonzalez comes, he makes this very summary. He's trying to depict the same type of embroidery, but he doesn't spend the time on it. And his faces are much more realistic than Pantoja. Pantoja paints, this is the future Philip IV and the little Infanta Ana who will marry Louis XIII and be the mother of Louis XIV. He paints them as adults, right? They look like little adults. But Gonzalez really paints them as children. They have that nice indentation that, the babies always have, and they have little fat, chubby hands. And then another nice thing about this show was that we found this Bartolome Gonzalez, which really is not well known at all. And I'm comparing it to Caravaggio's Rest on the Flight to Egypt, same subject. And we learned, recent research by an Irish scholar has told us that this artist had a copy of a Caravaggio in his inventory, in his studio when he died. And so, he's painting, like Pantoja, but a little bit more updated, and then he's also painting like Caravaggio, but not really. I mean, look at the difference between the two. The Spaniard is, much less idealized. It's less lyrical. Really, it's more realistic. And finally, we come to Velasquez. We have 7 El Grecos in the exhibition, 3 Velasquez, including this fabulous portrait of the poet Góngora, which belongs to the Museum of Fine Arts. And I'll share with you another little discovery. What time is it? Oh, I have to hurry up. We got to get back to see Obama. when my mentor and professor Jonathan Brown saw the exhibition in Boston, he said that he finally understood something that Palomino said about Velasquez's relationship to Tristan. So here we have Luis Tristan, El Greco's student. Here he's doing a portrait. And what Palomino said, Palomino was sort of like the Spanish Vasari. He did a work on the lives of the painters and sculptors in Spain. And he was at the end of Velasquez's life, so he knew people who knew Velasquez, but he didn't publish it until 1724. But in any case, what he writes in his entry on Tristan is that Tristan, he describes several of his works, and he says that they're excellent and that they were greatly applauded. And then he says, finally, his ability was so great, and he means Tristan's ability was so great, that he was worth of having Velasquez apply himself to emulate his manner, because it seemed so good to him, and abandon that of Pacheco, his master. And so look at this carefully when you go to the exhibition. The way that he models the face with layers and layers of paint that are almost unblended is what Velasquez picks up in this fabulous thing. I mean, Velasquez is, Velasquez. I mean, he really penetrated the psychology, of the sitter. I mean, we see this embittered poet who had been, out of favor and all that. But the manner of painting he gets from Tristan, which is amazing. And this is in the exhibition too, because it's by Pacheco, his master, and this is Pacheco's manner, being very, very linear. And building up with shade, and blending and sfumato and all that. But so he changes his manner. He abandons Pacheco and he paints like Tristan. So I think I'll end there, except we have, I have so much more. But wait a minute, let me just do the last one. Maino, look at Maino. Oh, Maino with Gentileschi, Maino. Wait, one thing. I really have to show you this. This is one of the great loans we got from the Prado. Fabulous thing by Maino. Maino became the drawing master to Philip IV, the young Prince Philip, right? And he had been to Italy. He had seen Caravaggio, but also the Caravaggeschi, like Orazio Gentileschi. Those wonderful depiction of these luxurious drapery stuffs. But the king and Lerma saw his talent. I mean, really wonderful painter. And they grabbed him and they made him the drawing teacher for the young Prince Philip, who would become Philip IV. So, Philip IV, Velasquez patron, learned about painting from Maino, from a Philip III artist. And so, his taste and his connoisseurship really comes from Maino, and he then goes on, of course, to be Velasquez's greatest patron. And here you see his Velasquez's famous Las Meninas. Now, I'm just also going to leave you with this one for food for thought. On the left, Tristan's Crucifixion from a private collection that's in the exhibition. Again, I don't think this has ever been exhibited. And on the right is Velasquez's treatment of the same subject. In a short introduction to Velasquez written by José Ortega y Gasset in 1946, he wrote, "Velasquez was probably one of the coolest artists in existence. To him, life meant to keep distance. His art reflects his attitude towards life. It is an art of distance. The emotional detachment of Velasquez is brought home here when we see the opposite trait in a Philip III artist, the raw emotional involvement of Tristan, which is another one of the stylistic traits of artists working during the reign of Philip III. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, if you want, I will answer a few questions. If you don't sit, but everybody, really, we really got to get home. But I will take a few questions if you so have the burning desire.
If you have a question, if you want to raise your hand, we have mics in the audience. To your right.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for your brilliant lecture. Perhaps the answer was in the audio headset, which I didn't listen to, but we were wondering about the picture of St. Francis embracing Christ on the cross, but stepping over the leopards with the crowns, and we were wondering about, and the cello soloist next to it?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, and it's not explained in the label booklet, and it's not explained in the audio guide because nobody's really figured it out, really. I mean, the Spaniards say the leopard represents sin. Now, where is the leopard from? I mean, Africa and Asia, right? And St. Francis, the missionary, stepping on these, the Ottoman Empire in a way. That's what I think. And that's what I got that idea from a Duke faculty member in the history department. But there are also 7 cats and 7 crowns. So it could be the 7 deadly sins. It could be the beast of the apocalypse. Somebody suggested that recently. It's another wonderful thing about doing an exhibition like this, because people ask the question, and then people start to seek the answer. So we've gotten 2 suggestions, and now it's going to be a question of really looking at St. Bonaventure and others who've written about St. Francis's visions, and see if we can tie that in somehow. Good question. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Okay. Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.